Dinner and a Book is supported by the Rex and Alice A. Martin Foundation of Elkhart, celebrating the spirit of Alice Martin and her love of good food and good friends.
White House history is often told through the stories of the best friends and closest confidants of American presidents. Today we'll discuss Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed, Harry Truman and Eddie Jacobson, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Daisy Suckley. Let's welcome my guest, presidential enthusiast Kathy Freese. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Thank you for suggesting this book. I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, and I learned so much I didn't really know about so many of these relationships.
Well, me too, and it was fun to read.
Yes, it certainly was. And you know, he starts off with Madison and Jefferson, and I kind of drifted out of that
I thought
chapter.
that was kind of boring.
It was a little boring, but they were good friends, and
Yeah.
we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
And then there were several stories that jumped out at me. Did he use the same format for every story he told? I was trying to look at that and think, oh, well, you talk about your background, how you meet this best friend, and
But their stories are also different. How they became friends, the people became friends, and everything like that. That they were also different. That it made it interesting.
it did make it interesting.
Yes.
Particularly, the one story that was so interesting was. Well, before we talk about that, let's talk about what we're
doing.
making.
Yes, because I've got to get started on it. Yes, we decided to do a picnic that FDR did for the King and Queen of England when they came to visit the U.S., I think right before World War II. So it would have been in the late 30s, I think.
It was at their home in Hyde Park.
In Hyde Park, and they did a picnic.
A picnic, and guess what? I'm going to be making hot dogs. I'm not making the hot dogs. I'm making I'm heating them up and putting them in the buns,
And they had sausage. I'm doing bratwurst,
Yes.
but then they also served cranberry sauce, which I thought was so interesting. And I am making cranberry sauce from my husband's grandmother's recipe. So it's the old-fashioned way of doing it. And then we're having, what else? Strawberries
Strawberries and cream. We're going to have ginger ale.
Ginger ale, yes.
because that was the drink that was fashionable at the time. And I don't know if they added, little spicy things to it. I don't know, or a little alcoholic beverages, but we're going to have that. And then you're doing something else.
Well, the sausage.
Oh, the sausages, yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to have sort of like brats and then hot dogs.
And serve it on
silver.
silver, because it's the king and queen.
Yes, and the interesting thing was, too, that repeated through that particular story, somebody kept dropping. They were, the waiters were so, I'm not even calling valets because they weren't. They were waiters that kept dropping dishes and trays of glasses and the king even mentioned, well, that's number 2 now. And anyway, Roosevelt would have had a good time no matter what.
Yes. And Daisy was there. Daisy was always there, which a lot of us, people didn't know how much a part of Roosevelt's life she was. But anyway, I'm making the cranberry sauce, and I've cooked it, just the fresh cranberries just in water, and then I'm putting it in this old-fashioned, I don't know what you call it. It's like an upside-down
It is
hat.
like a colander in a way,
Yeah,
isn't it?
and this is what they use to make applesauce, any kind of sauce. You put this in there, and you've obviously used this a lot for cranberry sauce. It's red, and then you put it in here, and you start moving it around.
See, there's a style here.
Yeah.
There's a format.
And the red is so gorgeous, the color here, and it's steaming up my glasses. And so I do this, and get rid of all the skin off the cranberries, and then I put in a ton of sugar.
Right, and it's really sweet, isn't it?
It's very
And the
sweet.
English don't have cranberries. They don't have the cranberry bogs. And I think this is a great choice to serve the king and queen.
Yeah.
And oh, it smells good. I thought you were going to put all of that sugar in. It looked like
No.
4 cups, and I thought, yeah, that's going to
Well,
be
when you
sweet.
do the whole, I've had to pare down the recipe. I had my husband do the math so that.
Of course. If you're going to make it, you need a 1/4 cup, and we're going to triple it.
Yeah.
Yes, we do that a lot too on this program. I'm just slicing strawberries because that would have been a nice thing to serve, probably on shortcake, which is not my favorite dessert. So I like fruit that's either has triple sec on it or whipping cream, and that's a safe bet for me. I love it.
Well, another person who probably would like triple sec and all that, it was Franklin Pierce.
Oh, he was another one. His buddy, his influencer was Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Which really surprised me. I don't think I
Yes.
knew that Hawthorne and Franklin Pierce were they were friends since the
College.
at Bowdoin.
Yes, Bowdoin up in Maine.
Maine.
Right.
And I found that really interesting. And Pierce was so nice to Hawthorne and his family, and Hawthorne was, grateful. But
He had a
Pierce
hard
got
time.
yeah.
He had a hard time making ends meet, and Pierce.
Hawthorne did, yeah.
Yes, Pierce. Well, there is a character. He probably has been voted the worst president we ever had, and then maybe Buchanan is near. I'm not sure, and maybe there'll be some current ones that might make that
Well,
list.
what's interesting is both Pierce and Hawthorne were big Union men and thought keep the peace and they didn't want the Union to sever.
Oh, right.
And
They didn't want it
they
to fall
kowtowed
apart.
to the Southerners.
Yes, they were Northerners who kowtowed to slavery, and Pierce had no compunction about having somebody own somebody else, as long as the Union stayed together. And actually, I think by the end of his presidency, he was just persona non grata. People just didn't even talk to him. He just did some really stupid things, and
what the quote I like in the book was Hawthorne's brother-in-law said, and I'm going to quote it here. It says, and Hawthorne did a campaign pamphlet for Pierce.
oh yes,
And Hawthorne's brother-in-law said, if he makes out Pierce to be a great man or a brave man, it will be the greatest work of fiction he ever wrote.
well, that was it. And they also had this motto: we poked, talking about the President Polk. We poked them, and now we're going to pierce them. And that was the motto for that particular what do you call it? Election.
Election.
Yes, and he did win, but he was miserable, and his marriage was not a very happy one. They were so different. And she just didn't even want to be in D.C. She wanted to be back in New Hampshire, and he did drink a lot.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
well,
he was
his
a
father owned a
carouser.
tavern in New Hampshire, and Pierce, from a very young age, did a lot of drinking, which was unfortunate. I'm going to do the.
You did that pretty
Isn't that a
neatly.
pretty color?
And not too much of a mess here. Doesn't look like anything was spilled.
Well, now I put the tons of sugar in.
And this is really a nice sweet, it's going to be a nice sweet sauce, hardly a lump in it. Okay, I'm working on these strawberries.
Well, but so the Hawthorne and Pierce were friends forever, and Pierce put Hawthorne's son through college.
Yes. He took care of him.
He did.
Because Hawthorne somehow couldn't figure out a way to make a living and to keep, his family going. And then they had so much, they lost children. I hope
Oh,
I'm not
horrible ways.
3 boys, and they lost all 3 of them.
Oh, yeah, and which sent his wife into a terrible depression, which you can understand. Now I've
But,
got to stir.
you know, I
Look
just-
at all this sugar. It's just nothing but sugar.
Ooh.
So now we'll do this, and then the next president was Lincoln and
Right.
Joshua Speed. I found that
I did too.
I found that very interesting. That Lincoln goes to Springfield and doesn't know a soul. Walks into Speed's grocery, looking for. He wanted to buy a bed, but he didn't have any money, and he asked Speed if he could pay him on time, and Speed said, "Oh, you can live with me." And they ended up living together, sharing a bed for four years.
Yes, and they knew each other so well. He could read Lincoln's moods and his feelings, and I had never realized that he was such a struck man. He was just persecuted
Lincoln.
by depression.
Oh, yes.
And he couldn't snap out of it, and Speed would take care of him.
And especially after Lincoln broke it off with Mary Todd, he was Speed. They took away everything sharp and all that. He thought Lincoln was going to take his life.
And that was so interesting too. You know, we are in the midst of Speed and Lincoln. We're going to also talk about Roosevelt and Suckley, and we can talk about Clinton and Vernon Jordan. You probably heard about that relationship. We're going to take a little break to set up for our next segment. And in the meantime, we want to have you look at the menu, the recipe, and look at this.
See, now
That's gorgeous.
Yeah, now I'm going to put it in the refrefrigerator.
And you hope that it will
hopefully
set up.
But if it doesn't set up, it'll still
Doesn't
taste
matter,
good.
right? Okay, we'll see you in just a few minutes. We'll be right back. And we're back, and we're going to continue to talk about Lincoln and his friend Speed, and continue our preparations for the King and Queen with our brats and our hot dogs and our cranberry sauce and some whipping cream and strawberries and ginger ale. What a picnic.
Yeah, I'm putting the sausage in. Well, they're brats really, but they wouldn't have had these ready-made ones, but that's what we're doing.
And these, my hot dogs are Oscar Mayer, and you grew up with his son. Grandson, yes, in Chicago. So you see, this continues on. And and I'm going to use some whipping cream. I'm whipping some of it, but I love strawberries with the liquid form of whipped cream. I just think it's wonderful. Let's see, you're going to.
I'm doing the sausage.
And your
cranberry sauce is
setting
up, hopefully. But
okay.
What I found interesting about Speed and Lincoln was that they were Whigs initially, and then when the Whig Party fell apart, Lincoln went to the Republicans, and Speed did not. And Speed became a slave owner.
Yes,
Speed married, and Speed always felt that Lincoln never would have married except that he saw how happy Speed was in his marriage.
Yes.
And so he thought, oh, that's okay. And the other thing is...
They were in trepidation getting married, these two men.
Yeah, they were
weren't
worried.
sure if they were going to be good husbands.
Yeah.
And the first night, everything bothered them. And so he sees Speed, like you say, he's influenced by his happiness.
Right.
So Lincoln gets engaged. He goes back to Mary Todd.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, Speed did not vote for Lincoln in the 1860 election. He was basically Southerner. He was from Kentucky. But then, after Lincoln became president and the Civil War started, Speed helped Lincoln in Kentucky to keep Kentucky neutral and not go to the South. So that was a real friend
to do that.
To do that.
Yes, and he could have influence in the state. It was Kentucky, wasn't it?
Yes.
And
he helped get rifles to the Union people. I mean,
so he was a true friend to Lincoln.
True friend.
He really was. Now they did have some disputes, and they didn't speak. I think one period it
for
was
like almost a decade. They didn't speak, but they ended up being
being
really,
friends again and
yes,
seeing
yes.
each other. And it just was amazing. I don't think Lincoln would have made it through his
No.
period of mourning, and then he loses two of his sons, and Speed is there to keep him, to talk to him. But he, like you say, Speed had
Yeah.
slaves,
And then the other, there is also in the book, Wilson and Colonel House.
Wilson.
And I questioned the writer putting Wilson and House in there because I think House was out for himself
I think he was too.
and was not really a true friend, like other friends who had been long-term friends. House didn't even get to know Wilson until Wilson was running for governor of New Jersey.
And he did a lot of things behind his back. After World War I, he decides he's going to write up the peace treaty. This is House. And of course, Wilson's lost his wife. And this man was just, he was absolutely, he was felled by this. And
until he found another. Wilson liked the
yeah,
ladies.
he found
Yeah.
Edith Galt, and then she meets House, and she says there's something not quite right about him. But Wilson says, "Oh, when you get to know him, you will love him like I do." And I never figured out. I think it's because House just took over and did his job, and Wilson didn't really want to be.
Yeah. Well, Wilson and
President.
House did have the same views on everything. But I don't think either comes off very well in this book.
I think the writer really didn't like either one. But I've
And I
heard
can
this about
understand.
Wilson.
Wilson was very rigid.
Yes, it was
yeah.
his way. He didn't believe in negotiating. They wanted to.
It's his way or the highway.
And that's how he lost his position at Princeton. I'm not saying that's exactly the reason, but he was voted out. And this House worked behind his back. He didn't want any credit, but he was working to take over positions that didn't even exist. He became Secretary of State, and he was Secretary of Defense, and he was this and that. They didn't have those positions, but he created this and became so indispensable to Wilson. Wilson just let him continue on. And then the Treaty of Versailles, that was sort of like the beginning and the end of their relationship.
Yeah. And then the next one, which I found very interesting, was Truman and Eddie Jacobson, who had served in the Army together in World War I. I mean, knew each other before that, I think, and then were in the same company or something. And then they are the ones that started the haberdashery together.
That's right.
Yes.
Back
and then
in,
they kind
in
of lost
Missouri.
But Jacobson and Truman remained very good friends throughout, and it was Jacobson who convinced Truman to recognize Israel,
yes.
against the advice of George Marshall, Truman's Secretary of State.
And Marshall was very angry.
Well, which I can understand why Marshall would be angry. And it was the Israeli, I can't think of his name now, who convinced Jacobson to go to Truman and try to tell him to...
Was it Ben Gurion?
No.
No?
No, gosh. Wiseman.
Oh, okay. Well, it was fascinating, and and we've just seen specials on the Holocaust, and it did show the anti-Semitism of some of our leaders. They just were not interested in recognizing Israel. But Jacobson
convinced Truman to do it.
He
So-
did, and
I bet very few people, I mean, that probably wasn't publicized
it probably
very
wasn't.
much.
But we were the first country to recognize
Right.
Israel.
Yeah.
And
But
that
it created a lot of problems, too, and George Marshall could see that it was going to create a lot of problems. And then there's FDR and
Daisy
Suckley.
Suckley. Oh, they're cousins.
Distant cousins.
And they loved to spend time together. She was seated at some of the most important tables with him. I don't think there was a romance.
No.
But
I think, but she was one of those who, I think FDR needed somebody to listen to him, to
Yes.
think he was wonderful.
Yes, because Eleanor was off doing her own
And
thing.
Eleanor was, on him to do all this stuff, whereas Daisy just listened, and they wrote letters. They found, after Daisy died, they found all these letters in a suitcase under her bed, and FDR's letters to her, and you found out a lot more about FDR by reading
Yes.
those. And she was at this dinner with the king and queen.
That's right. So she pops in and out,
Yeah.
but she's there, and she goes on some of the trips on his boat to meet people. She was the fly on the wall, wasn't she?
Yeah, and she never, she was very quiet, just was there to support. And her beautiful house just is down the way from Hyde Park and Wilderstein. And
You've been there.
and we were there in 2001 when they just opened it, because she died in 1992.
She was almost
She was-
101.
Her in her mid-90s, I can't remember, but
She was healthy. She was strong. She remembered all
smoked
this.
like that. Her house smelled of cigarette smoke.
Oh, and that was very common, wasn't it? It was the
Yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah, but FDR needed somebody like that, unquestioning, and
Yes.
just to be a sounding board.
Hey,
for
we all
him.
do, don't we?
Yeah, and then the next one is JFK,
JFK and the Englishman.
David Ormsby Gore, that they'd known since before the World War II.
And he ends up proposing to Jackie.
after Kennedy dies.
Yes, but she says no, and I
No.
was kind of surprised. She preferred Aristotle Onassis.
So, and that was interesting that Gore was around during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yes, he
and
gave
advising.
advice. You would want somebody to give you advice.
Oh my gosh!
But
yes.
what if it was the wrong advice? I mean, these people
Well,
knew.
he was the ambassador English to the British ambassador to the U.S. And then then we had Nixon and B.B. Rebozo.
Oh, yes. Gosh, that was
That was interesting. They basically didn't really talk. They just
No.
drank together and
kept each other company.
kept each other company. And Nixon would visit Rebozo down in Florida.
And I don't know how he got along with Pat, but Pat and Richard Nixon really didn't get along. And I think he liked to have somebody quiet who was there just to kind of
Rebozo
admire
never
him.
asked anything of Nixon, and that's one of these things. These first friends, they don't ask for favors.
Right. Well, they're usually wealthy enough that it doesn't matter, and that's a good thing to do too. We're going to continue to finish our prep for the American English picnic. How are your brats?
Brats are finished.
And I wonder, did I bring? Yeah, just put them right there. Yeah. So we're going to set up our picnic table, and keep whipping these by hand here to see how I like this. And then we'll invite you to our American picnic, and Roosevelt will be there, and Daisy Suckley, and the King and Queen. So you come along with us. All right, we'll be right back. Our book, First Friends, by Gary Ginsberg, and my guest, of course, is Kathy Freese. And let's talk about our food just kind of quickly here. Look what you made that's set up.
The cranberry sauce, the old-fashioned way of making it. It's
Yes.
full of sugar.
And then we have some hot dogs and brats. This is for the picnic the FDR gave for the King and Queen of England. So hot dogs with the sauces, some potato salad, and then strawberries with cream. And of course, this must have
ginger ale.
must have just come out about that time.
Yeah.
Ginger ale, and
Tastes good.
It was a very
To
yes.
the presidents.
To the Presidents is right. I like this book, but it makes me wonder, can you learn to be a leader? Can you model yourself on someone, or are you a born leader? What do you think?
I think there is an innate ability to be a leader. But now maybe people can learn somewhat, but if you don't have that innate ability, I don't think you ever become a great leader. A great leader.
A great leader, yes. You could lead maybe a small group, but Yeah, somebody that inspires
Yeah.
and leads, and it has to be a certain fire in that person.
Right, like Truman. I mean, I think he started becoming leader when he was in the Army
Yes.
in World War I and in charge of a company. That
That
helped
gave him.
Yes.
But to sit down and say, now today I'm going to be forceful, and I'm going to have a vision, and I'm going to have everybody follow me, it didn't help Wilson at all, did
no,
it? He was
no.
not
He
a
was
born
too
leader.
rigid. He
He
couldn't-
was.
Yeah. But really, I thought this book was an easy read.
It was.
If you don't know much about the presidents, you'll learn a lot about them. But I found it fascinating that he did get the idea of looking at presidents' friends, because that's something that we don't.
Yes, and we're influenced by our friends. Even in our own modest lives, we're influenced. And so I do want to thank you for joining us. Kathy, thank you.
I enjoyed being here again, and I love hot dogs,
I
so
do
I think
too.
this
We're
was the
gonna have
perfect
one.
meal.
So good food, good friends, good books make for a great life. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
This WNIT local production has been made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Dinner and a Book is supported by the Rex and Alice A. Martin Foundation of Elkhart, celebrating the spirit of Alice Martin and her love of good food and good friends.